The Cincinnati Bengals were among the NFL's worst teams in the 1990s. After a 9-7 record that won the AFC Central in 1990, along with crushing their rivals, the Houston Oilers, 41-14 in the wildcard round, before falling to the Los Angeles Raiders 20-10 in the divisional round, they would not have a winning record for the rest of the decade. Despite many high draft picks, none of them were able to materialize, such as trading with the brand new Carolina Panthers to select John Carter, number 1 overall out of Penn State in the 1995 draft, just for Carter to only play 35 games for the team due to injuries. The team went through 3 head coaches in the 1990s, which included Dave Shula, the son of the NFL legend Don Shula, who guided the Miami Dolphins to a 17-0 season in 1972. Dave failed to live up to his father's name, going 19-52 as their head coach from 1992 to his firing after a 1-6 start in 1996. After firing Dick LeBeau following the 2002 season, the Bengals hired Marvin Lewis to be their 9th head coach in franchise history. Lewis was a defensive-minded coach, serving as the first defensive coordinator of the Baltimore Ravens from 1996 to 2001, which saw him develop one of the greatest defenses in NFL history in 2000, which got the Ravens their first Super Bowl win. The Bengals were expected to be below average, coming off of a 2-14 record from last season, earning them the number 1 pick in the 2003 draft. With that pick, the Bengals selected a new quarterback, being Carson Palmer, the Heisman Trophy winner out of USC. Despite the new quarterback, the Bengals started Jon Kitna, who was on the team since 2001. The Bengals in their first season under Lewis didn't start off well, as they started 1-4, but then they shocked the league and had a 7-2 run and were on the verge of their first winning season since 1990. And if they won out and if the Denver Broncos lost out, they would face the Indianapolis Colts in the playoffs. Unfortunately for the Bengals, they lost out, finishing 8-8. However, the Bengals still had a lot to cheer for as they finally had some respect again, as they even beat the 13-3 Kansas City Chiefs, who were the number 2 seed in the AFC that year. Kitna was even awarded Comeback Player of the Year as he threw for 3,591 yards, a career-high 26 touchdowns, and 15 interceptions, a career low when he played all 16 games. The Bengals were expected to be better in 2004 with all the expectations they set. They even drafted Chris Perry, 26th overall out of Michigan in the draft, unfortunately due to injuries. Perry would be a bust the same way as John Carter was. When the season started, the Bengals regressed, going 8-8 again, but entering the final 2 games with a 6-8 record, giving them no shot to make the playoffs. Carson Palmer finally got to play, and he only played 13 games due to injury, where he was mediocre, throwing for 2,897 yards, 18 touchdowns, and 18 interceptions. In 2005, the Bengals drafted David Pollock, a linebacker out of Georgia, and like Carter and Perry, Pollock only lasted 3 seasons due to injury. The team was expected to be average, given what they've done so far in the Lewis era, but they managed to shock the league once again, entering the final 2 games of the season with an 11-3 record, and their first playoff berth and division title since 1990, along with a chance to get a first-round bye with similar conditions as making the playoffs 2 years prior. Unfortunately, the Bengals lost out and had to face the Pittsburgh Steelers in the wildcard round. Despite Carson Palmer's improvement, who threw for 3,836 yards with a league-leading 67.8 completion percentage and another league-leading 32 touchdowns as opposed to 12 interceptions, the Steelers were favored to continue their mission of having their legendary running back Jerome Bettis retire as a champion in his hometown of Detroit. Early in the game, the Bengals had the worst start they could ask for.
Going for the deep ball, looking for Johnson. He's under it and taken off down the sideline down to the 23 of Pittsburgh. And Palmer was walloped after the throw.
Thanks to this hit, Palmer tore his ACL, and Kitna had to keep the Bengals' hopes of a Super Bowl alive. The Bengals entered the first quarter with a 10-0 lead and entered halftime with a 17-14 lead, along with getting the ball to start the second half. Unfortunately for the Bengals, a botched field goal try and 2 interceptions from Kitna were too much to overcome, and the Steelers won 31-17. The Steelers would go on to win Super Bowl 40, hurting the Bengals even more. The Bengals drafted Jonathan Joseph, a cornerback 24th overall out of South Carolina in the 2006 draft, to build more on that defense. Also realizing that they needed to protect Palmer, they would draft Andrew Whitworth, an offensive tackle 55th overall out of LSU. Despite the changes, The Bengals would unfortunately enter a period of mediocrity, as Palmer would have a good season in 06 before becoming a total turnover machine, failing to help the Bengals win big games, even suffering an elbow injury in 2008 where they finished 4-11-1. They also saw the Baltimore Ravens and the Pittsburgh Steelers compete for the Lamar Hunt Trophy. When 2009 arrived, the Bengals were featured on Hard Knocks, a reality show about NFL teams before the season started for the first time in franchise history. To give Palmer more protection, they drafted Andre Smith, an offensive tackle 6th overall out of Alabama in the draft. The team was expected to be the same old team, but managed to go 10-6, winning the AFC North for the first time in 4 seasons, being the number 4 seed in the AFC thanks to losing a heartbreaker in Week 1 against the Broncos, along with losing 3 of their last 4 games. Palmer had a mediocre season, throwing for 3,094 yards, 21 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions, with most of his highlights going to Chad Johnson, who had 72 catches for 1,047 yards and 9 touchdowns. In the playoffs, the Bengals would host the New York Jets, who made the playoffs after beating the Bengals' second-string team the previous week. The Jets were led by a rookie head coach named Rex Ryan and a rookie quarterback out of USC named Mark Sanchez. With the Jets lacking playoff experience, the Bengals were favored to win, but they lost 24-14 thanks to a mediocre performance by Palmer, along with fumbling the ball early in the game, and Shane Graham missing 2 field goals, both were from inside 40 yards. Marvin Lewis was later awarded the NFL Coach of the Year award, the first time a Bengals coach got the honor. Unsurprisingly, Graham did not return to Cincinnati the next year. The next season, the Bengals drafted Jermaine Grisham, a tight end out of Oklahoma with the 21st pick, along with a defensive tackle out of Georgia named Geno Atkins, 120th overall. They also added Adam Pac-Man Jones, a cornerback in free agency, to build on the defense more. Despite the additions, the Bengals went 4-12 in 2010, which was dead last in the division. Carson Palmer once again had a mediocre season, throwing for 3,971 yards, 26 touchdowns, and 20 interceptions. After that, Palmer requested to be traded due to lack of success in Cincinnati. He said that he played for the love of the game and not for money. Though Palmer's trade request was initially declined, he later got his wish and was traded to the Oakland Raiders. 2011 was a major year for the Bengals. They had the 4th pick in the NFL draft, and they selected A.J. Green, a wide receiver out of Georgia, to replace Chad Johnson, who was now on the New England Patriots. To replace Palmer, the Bengals selected Andy Dalton out of TCU, 35th overall. Halfway through the season, they were 6-2, tied with the Ravens and the defending AFC champion Steelers in the AFC North. Unfortunately, the Bengals had a mediocre second half of the season, finishing 9-7, which included a heartbreaking loss to the Houston Texans in Week 14, and being swept by the Ravens and Steelers. The Bengals' new players had some flashes, with Andy Dalton throwing for 3,398 yards, 20 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions. A.J. Green had 65 catches for 1,057 yards and 7 touchdowns. Geno Atkins had 7.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries, and returned one of them for a touchdown. Atkins was also named All-Pro, a major honor for the sophomore. Despite the collapse, the Bengals were able to make the playoffs as the number 6 seed in the AFC, as they would visit the Texans, who were playing in their first playoff game in franchise history. Thanks to injuries the Texans suffered throughout the season, they'd start T.J. Yates at quarterback, a rookie out of North Carolina, making this the first playoff game in NFL history where both starting quarterbacks were rookies. Towards the end of the half, it was a 10-10 tie, and Dalton was going on a drive to make himself a legend in Cincinnati. Instead, a different legend was born.
Batted down and intercepted. Intercepted by J.J. Watt. Touchdown, Houston.
The Bengals were never able to recover from that mistake, losing the game 31-10, as Dalton would throw 2 more interceptions, including one to Jonathan Joseph, who walked in free agency before the season started, and their defense being unable to stop Andre Johnson and Arian Foster. The next season, the Bengals picked up Vontaze Burfict, a linebacker out of Arizona State, after he went undrafted in the draft. When the season started, the Bengals had a poor first half of the season, being 3-5 after losing 4 games in a row. However, the Bengals went on a hot streak, winning 7 of their last 8, finishing the season 10-6. the same record as the Baltimore Ravens. Unfortunately, they didn't win the division due to being 3-3 against it, as well as having a 20-19 loss to the Dallas Cowboys in the second half of the season. The Bengals were once again the number 6 seed in the AFC, and once again had to visit the Texans. With this was the first time since the strike-shortened 1982 season where the Bengals made the playoffs in consecutive years. Unlike the Bengals, the Texans were on a cold streak, being stuck as the number 3 seed after 3 double-digit losses in the last 4 games, losing the chance to get the number 1 seed in the AFC. The game started much better for the Bengals, thanks to Leon Hall intercepting Matt Schaub, returning it for a touchdown to take a 7-6 lead. Unfortunately, their offense couldn't do anything, and the Texans won 19-13, with Shane Graham, the former Bengal, going 4 for 4 on field goals. The Bengals later saw the Ravens win Super Bowl 47 to add insult to an already disappointing season. In 2013, the Bengals added James Harrison to the team, who they considered a monster for years when he played for the Steelers, adding a bit of fuel to the rivalry between the two teams. The Bengals were featured on Hard Knocks again and were expected to be much better than they were before, and they were. The Bengals won the AFC North for the first time since 2009 with an 11-5 record, tying the 2005 team with the best record in team history in the Lewis era. The Bengals were also a perfect 8-0 at home, which included a 13-6 win over the New England Patriots in Week 5, which could have potentially given them a great playoff spot. However, thanks to having 2 overtime losses that could have been avoided, the Bengals were stuck as the number 3 seed, and they would host the 9-7 San Diego Chargers in the wildcard round. The Bengals beat San Diego on the road 17-10 back in Week 13 and were favored to win. However, despite a 10-7 halftime lead, the Bengals completely collapsed, with Dalton fumbling the ball away, throwing 2 interceptions, which led to San Diego winning the game 27-10. After the game, Jay Gruden, their offensive coordinator since 2011, and the younger brother of former Raiders and Buccaneers coach John Gruden, and Mike Zimmer, their defensive coordinator since 2008, left to become head coaches. Gruden went to the Washington Redskins, while Zimmer went to the Minnesota Vikings. The Bengals replaced them with Hugh Jackson, their running backs coach, and Paul Guenther, their linebackers coach, for the last 2 seasons. In 2014, James Harrison retired from the NFL, but walked back on that decision and signed with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Though he wasn't a linebacker, the Bengals drafted Darqueze Dennard, a cornerback out of Michigan State, 24th overall in the draft, to build more on that defense. Later on, the Bengals drafted A.J. McCarron, a quarterback out of Alabama, 164th overall, to back up Andy Dalton. The season started great at 3-0, their first since 2006, beating the hated Ravens on the road along with getting a 33-7 victory over the Tennessee Titans, their ex-division rival. After an early bye week in Week 4, they went to Foxborough to face the New England Patriots, who were coming off a 41-14 loss against the Kansas City Chiefs on Monday. At the press conference, Bill Belichick gave one of his most famous quotes.
We're on to Cincinnati.
On to Cincinnati they were, as the Bengals lost 43-17. The season didn't get much better, as they tied with the Carolina Panthers 37-37, along with getting shut out by the Indianapolis Colts, falling to 3-2-1. However, the Bengals won on a 7-2 run, but both of those losses were to division rivals, being to the Browns and the Steelers. With that, the final game of the 2014 regular season saw the 10-4-1 Bengals visit the 10-5 Steelers. The winner would host the 10-6 Ravens, while the loser would visit the 11-5 Colts. Unfortunately, due to 2 Dalton interceptions, the Bengals weren't able to take advantage of holding Le'Veon Bell to 20 yards and 8 carries, as the Steelers won 27-17. In Indianapolis, the Bengals were down 13-10 at halftime, but would get the ball to start the second half. However, they could not get anything done, as the Colts won 26-10, advancing to the divisional round for the second consecutive year, while the Bengals season ended with a loss in the wildcard round for the 4th year in a row. Marvin Lewis also tied Jim Mora for the most playoff losses without a win with 6. But unlike Mora, he did it all with one team. 2015 was a make-or-break year for Marvin Lewis and the Bengals. After making the playoffs the last 4 years, they were due for a win. Though they lost those games, Andy Dalton and company have experience and proved that they can compete with top-tier teams, as they beat the Patriots in 2013, who reached the AFC Championship game that year, and swept the Ravens in 2014, who almost reached the AFC Championship game, along with upsetting the defending AFC champion Broncos. The Bengals started 8-0, their best start in franchise history, with the only other unbeaten teams being the Carolina Panthers and the New England Patriots. Those 8 wins saw them beat the likes of the Kansas City Chiefs, who built themselves into a playoff contender with Alex Smith and Andy Reid, the Seattle Seahawks, who reached the last 2 Super Bowls, and the Pittsburgh Steelers, the defending AFC North champion. Unfortunately, their dreams of an unbeaten season came to an end when they lost to the Houston Texans at home on Monday night by a score of 10-6, failing to stop J.J. Watt and the defense. The next week, they lost a heartbreaker to their former quarterback Carson Palmer and the Arizona Cardinals on Sunday night 34-31, seemingly putting an end to their number 1 seed dreams as the Patriots were now 10-0. However, life returned as the Bengals won back-to-back games while the Patriots lost theirs, putting both teams at 10-2, along with the Denver Broncos also being 10-2. The next week saw the Bengals take a massive blow as they not only lost to the Steelers 33-20, they also saw Andy Dalton be put on IR with a thumb injury, forcing the sophomore A.J. McCarron under center. The next week saw McCarron manage a 24-14 victory over the San Francisco 49ers as Jeremy Hill, who they drafted 55th overall the previous season, rushed for 2 touchdowns and the defense got 2 interceptions. The penultimate game of the Bengals schedule saw them go to Denver to take on the Broncos, where the winner was almost guaranteed a first-round bye, as the Bengals were 11-3 while the Broncos were 10-4. The Bengals started with a 14-0 lead, with the defense preventing a touchdown late to make it 14-3 at halftime. However, the Bengals struggled against the no-fly zone, letting the Broncos lead 17-14 late in the game. The Bengals did manage to tie the game to set it into overtime, with the Broncos getting the ball first, and they kicked a field goal to take a 20-17 lead. It was up to McCarron to be a Cincinnati legend to get his team a first-round bye for the first time since 1988.
A.J. Green in motion. McCarron lost the ball. If the Broncos recover, they win. Ware's on it, and the Broncos are in the playoffs.
With this loss, the Bengals could not get the number 1 seed, but would need to beat the Ravens and hope Denver lost to San Diego to get the number 2 seed. Unfortunately, only one of those things happened, forcing Cincinnati to host the 10-6 Steelers in the wildcard round. It started off poorly as the Steelers had a 15-0 lead in the fourth quarter, but the Bengals attempted a comeback for the ages as they got a touchdown from Jeremy Hill, a field goal from Mike Nugent, and A.J. McCarron throwing a touchdown to A.J. Green to make it 16-15 in favor of the Bengals. They failed on the 2-point conversion, but it was time for their defense to make a stand.
In an attempt at a winning field goal. Jones, middle of the field, and that is intercepted, and it's Perfect who comes away with the football.
The Bengals couldn't be any more happy. It seemed like they made a comeback against a hated division rival, and with it being inside 2 minutes, all they needed was a first down. And even if they couldn't get it, the Steelers would have to spend all 3 of their timeouts and be down by 4.
Here's Hill. Jarvis Jones. Ball is out! Shazier had it for a moment, and now it's picked up by Cockrell.
This is why it's never over till it's over, to quote Yogi Berra. The defense would have to bail the team out again, but they let the Steelers convert a 4th and 3, and then this happens.
Roethlisberger from the pocket, middle of the field, incomplete. Oh, a flag does come in. Went to the head. Lewis Harris is going to be flagged for this on the hit on Antonio Brown, and it's going to put the Steelers in field goal range.
Not only did Perfect remove his heroics with one play, his fellow teammate Adam Jones shoved the referee to give Chris Boswell a gimme field goal, which he easily made, and the Bengals couldn't do what Tennessee did against Buffalo, ending their season in the most heartbreaking way since the Super Bowl losses to San Francisco. Marvin Lewis also managed to break the NFL record, having 7 playoff losses without a win, a record that will likely never be broken. In 2016, the Bengals' run of playoff losses came to an end. Unfortunately, it wasn't in the way they hoped, as they finished with a 6-9-1 record, their first losing season since 2010. The season did see them play in London for the first time ever, where they tied with the Washington Redskins 27-27, the third tie in the Marvin Lewis era. They also had a second consecutive primetime matchup against the Houston Texans on Christmas Eve, where if they won, they would create an AFC South championship game the next week, but instead, They lost another defensive battle 12-10 following Randy Bullock, the former Texan, missing a field goal to give his former team their second consecutive AFC South crown. The Bengals did end the season with a win over the Ravens, preventing them from getting another winning season. After the season, Andrew Whitworth, their longtime offensive tackle, walked in free agency and signed with the LA Rams. Fortunately for the Bengals, their fortunes weren't as bad as Hugh Jackson's, their offensive coordinator for the last 2 seasons, as he started the season 0-14 as the Cleveland Browns' new head coach, before finally getting a win in Week 16 over the Chargers. In 2017, the Bengals celebrated their 50th season in franchise history starting 0-3, which were a 20-0 loss to the Ravens at home, a 13-9 defensive slugfest against the Texans in the third consecutive primetime matchup between those two squads, and a heartbreaking 27-24 overtime loss to the Green Bay Packers on the road, which saw them blow a 21-7 halftime lead and give up a game-tying touchdown in the final seconds. The Bengals were unable to climb out of that 0-3 hole as they entered the final game of the season with a 6-9 record. Their last game was against the 9-6 Ravens, who found themselves in a must-win situation as both the Tennessee Titans and the Buffalo Bills won their Week 17 matchups to finish 9-7. If the Ravens won, they would visit the Kansas City Chiefs in the playoffs. If the Bengals won, their hated division rivals would have to watch the postseason on their couch. It was an incredible start for Cincinnati as they led 24-10 in the third quarter following a pick six. However, the Ravens scored 17 unanswered points to give them a 27-24 lead. Dalton faced a 4th and long, but then this happened.
Ravens trying to end it here. 4th down. Dalton steps up. Dalton throws. It's complete. Caught by Boyd. Tyler Boyd. Touchdown. Remarkable. The Cincinnati Bengals have stunned this crowd.
Wild play gave Cincinnati the lead and caused many people to go crazy.
Ravens trying to end it here. 4th down. Dalton steps up. Dalton throws.
Were unable to do anything else, and they were eliminated from playoff contention. Following the game, Bills fans donated to Andy Dalton's charity as due to Baltimore losing, the Bills clinched a playoff berth for the first time since 1999. Though the Bengals had another losing season, they made a fan base happy that didn't come at their expense. Arguably, this was the best thing to come out of the Marvin Lewis era. 2018 saw the Bengals fire off to a 4-1 start, including another win against the Ravens. However, it all fell apart following a heartbreaking loss against the Steelers, as the Bengals only won 2 games after that, finishing 6-10. They did have a chance to eliminate the Steelers themselves, much like what they did to the Ravens last year, but they lost a close 16-13 game. So regardless of how that game went, it didn't matter as the 9-6 Ravens beat the 7-1 Browns 26-24, giving them their first AFC North title since 2012. As for the Bengals, it was the beginning of a long offseason following their collapse when October hit. After the season, the Bengals and Marvin Lewis agreed to part ways after 16 seasons, or 31.3% of the Bengals' history at the time. Lewis ended his tenure with Cincinnati with a 131-122-3 record in the regular season, helping his team get 7 playoff berths and 4 division titles. However, due to not getting a single playoff win, the Lewis era proved to be a tough time to be a Bengals fan. Even though Lewis brought the Bengals to a degree of respectability following a terrible 1990s, all of Lewis's accomplishments were shallow without success in January, showing that legacies are always made in the postseason, and Lewis couldn't bring the success he achieved in Baltimore over to Cincinnati. The Bengals replaced Lewis with Zach Taylor, who was 36 years old at the time, and he spent the last 2 years with the Los Angeles Rams being the assistant wide receivers coach and the quarterbacks coach, which also saw them reach Super Bowl 53 in 2018. In Taylor's third year, the Bengals won a playoff game for the first time in over 30 years and later reached the Super Bowl for the first time since Super Bowl 23 against the 49ers. Unfortunately, The likes of Andy Dalton, A.J. Green, and Geno Atkins, who showed loyalty to the franchise for years, were not a part of that, as they were gradually let go after Lewis's departure. Overall, Lewis proved to be the coach the Bengals needed at the time, but due to his failure in January, his legacy will always be what might have been.